Time magazine has considered the person of 2011 the protester. Mass movements in Tunisia and Egypt toppled repressive regimes. The revolutionary upsurge in the Middle East and North Africa has reverberated across the world. In Athens, in Madrid, London, Chile, and the US in the form of the Occupy movement for economic justice. It is within the context of global economic crisis, austerity measures imposed upon the world's poor, and mass discontent that we began 2012. For Nigeria, the new year marked the beginning of massive, unprecedented strikes, the likes of which have not been witnessed there for many years. President Jonathan, in response to orders by the IMF and the World Bank, removed the oil subsidy on January 1st, dealing a hard blow to the Nigerian people. Since Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, it contains a population of 164 million, 30 million of which are unemployed, and 2/3 live on $1.25 a day. The removal of the subsidy caused prices of oil to double, thus increasing the prices of transportation and food to unaffordable heights. In response, the people of Nigeria took to the streets in the millions. The largest crowds were seen in cities like Kano in the north and Lagos in the south. The Nigerian Labor Congress and the Trade Union Congress, the two biggest federations of labor, have responded to the uprisings by calling for indefinite general strike beginning on January 9th and demanding that Jonathan's government reverse fuel prices to what they were, to 65 naira. Protesters in Kano blocked main roads, shut down gas stations, and renamed the city's main square their Liberation Square, a name that's reminiscent of Tahrir Square in Egypt. Pengasen, the oil union, threatened to shut down oil production if the government did not reinstall the subsidy. However, the federations of labor called for a break in the strike in order to recuperate over the weekend as the negotiations of the government ensued. On the 16th of January, the general strike was called off and fuel costs were cut from 141 naira under the removal of the subsidy to 97 naira, yet still much higher than the 65 price of the oil that was prior to the removal of the subsidy. This agreement between the government and the federations of labor fell short of meeting the demands of the Nigerian people. How is it possible that Nigerians live in poverty when Nigeria is the world's largest supplier of crude oil and the second economy in all of sub-Saharan Africa? To get to the root of this question and to understand the current policies imposed by Jonathan's government requires a look at the historical context of Nigeria and its oil economy. The mainstream media often shows Africa's underdevelopment, overpopulation, and diseases as a cause of its local culture and values. The portrayals of the mainstream media have solidified misconceptions of the African continent as a place of never-ending violence, tribalistic, and uncivilized. Some academics have even developed the theory of African patrimonialism, or rule through personal ties and loyalty instead of ideology or law. None of these views have considered imperialism's detrimental ecological and human effects on the continent. Even the World Bank admitted in 2005 that Africa is being continually drained of wealth through depletion of minerals, forests, and other ecosocial factors. When did the looting of Africa begin? Marx has considered the plunder of Africa as an integral part of primitive accumulation of Western capital. Since capital is expansionary to meet the needs of Europe's industries, colonial occupation and domination of the African continent was a must. The exploitation of Africa's human and natural resources did not end with colonial rule. The crisis of capitalism inherently drives the search to exploit new markets and rescue declining profits at home. In '79, the U.S. Reserve imposed what's known as the Volcker shock, a rise in U.S. interest rate in order to halt inflation that would have a drastic effect on third world economies. By 1982, this new U.S. policy drove the third world into debt crisis, into austerity and decline, and Nigeria did not remain unaffected. The IMF and World Bank imposed structural adjustment packages that enforced neoliberal policies, including the privatization of natural and state-owned resources, the deregulation of the oil sector, and the devaluation of the naira. In 2005, this pro-capitalist, pro-free market agenda known as the Washington Consensus reaffirmed third world countries that certain neoliberal policies were required for macroeconomic stability. The ruling elites of these countries, including those of Nigeria, in complicity with the leaders of the World Bank and IMF, imposed these neoliberal policies. And Nigeria is of special interest to ruling classes as it contains high-quality crude oil that is less expensive and easier to refine. The international petroleum industries exported over $69 billion worth of oil from Nigeria in 2010. The US gets 44% of oil extracted from Nigeria. More oil comes from Africa than the Middle East. And Nigeria supplies 8% of crude oil imported in the US. Despite its large oil production, the Nigerian state imports refined gasoline from international companies through independent marketers because it lacks the facilities to refine oil. Not to mention, the current underfined state-owned facilities in Nigeria do not produce enough oil to meet the domestic demands. Nigerian oil production is run by foreign corporations such as the Shell Company, ExxonMobil, Total SA, and NESPS, which produce 90% of Nigeria's oil. It is these corporations that profit the most from draining of resources of Nigeria, while the Nigerian people do not share in the profits. When companies as Shell, whose profit-driven business wreaks environmental and human havoc, they face no consequences. For years, over 300 oil spills occur in the Delta, while destroying entire farms and villages. Yet the interests of big oil are protected by local governments and US allies. The protection of oil interests in the Niger Delta is used as a justification for the militarization of the country by its military and US aid. But the presence of the military of the United States and funding in the region is nothing new. Bill Clinton considered Africa a transnational security threat when justifying the enforcement of free market policies. And Madeleine Albright in 1999 said Africa was a major battleground in the global fight against terror, crime, and drugs. After 9/11, the administration of Bush has converted the above into actions. The US has developed an Africa contingency operations and assistance program to strengthen the militaries that they favor and assist their local allies in suppressing local unrest. The US has troops and bases in most of the African countries that are full of resources such as coltan and oil. The US is using the war on terror as a pretext to expand its footprint in Africa. Most recently, the US is using the supposable acts of an Islamic group known as Boko Haram as an excuse to increase the military of the United States in the region. In August, the general in charge of AFRICOM made assertions that Boko Haram has loose connections with Al-Qaeda in North Africa. And by October, Hillary Clinton said the US would help fight the Islamist group, and the US Special Forces were sent to Nigeria. An article in Bloomberg said that Boko Haram is a, quote, a militant Islamic group inspired by Afghanistan's Taliban movement, end quote. The US government, under the justification of the global war on terror, is exploiting these violent acts in order to increase the presence of US troops in Nigeria and secure their oil interests in the region. In a country as ethnically diverse as Nigeria, the threat of Boko Haram is being used by the ruling class in a deadly and divisive way. The Nigerian government is using the actions of Boko Haram in order to intensify the ethnic and religious divisions amongst the Nigerians and divide the working class. But mass movements have the capacity to transform social consciousness and break across these dividing barriers. Links were already observed amongst Christians and Muslims groups during the massive uprisings in Nigeria. In northern states, there have been reports that Muslim youth were guarding churches and Christians are encircled and laid watch as Muslims prayed. Working class fraternizations of this kind are certainly are dangerous in the eyes of the elite, who seek to manipulate and intensify these tensions to benefit their agendas. Although the Nigerian strike was called off and the workers did not win their immediate demand, important lessons have been gained here by the Nigerian people. What first started as a movement to reinstall the fuel subsidy became a movement that demonstrated the power of the working class when it engages in struggle. The power it derives from being at the point of production. Shutting down the Nigerian oil production would have hit at the heart of Nigeria's ruling classes and the global oil economy, and the interruption of Nigerian oil production would have increased crude oil prices globally. The Nigerian general strike is part of a global awakening, and the workers of Nigeria have provided important contributions to global movement fighting for change. The massive strikes in Nigeria are helping to build class confidence of workers across the globe, like those in Greece, Spain, and Egypt. And workers in the sub-Saharan region have shown that they too are part of this global struggle. In the US, we have a responsibility to stand in solidarity with the workers of Nigeria and workers across the globe as they initiate movements for change. The involvement of the US in Africa, in countries like Somalia, in Ghana, in Algeria, and Nigeria, does little to further the struggle of the Nigerian workers. We must oppose the intervention by the US military in Africa and the presence of AFRICOM and stand in solidarity with striking workers all over the globe and in Nigeria. Thank you.